Welcome, Rabbi David Milston.
Thank you.
Back to the yeshiva. I mean, you didn't have to come that far. Baruch Hashem, you're a resident of the broader gush of Alon Shvut, the Rosh Tachnit of the Overseas Division of Midrashet Harova. So, thank you for joining us here, Erev Shabbos.
Thank you.
And Parshas Vayakhel starts in a very odd note. The Mishkan is a very regulated and hierarchical institution. You can't just stroll around. It's not open for average Jews. Only Kohanim Gedolim. Certain zones you can't enter, you're not. And yet, the project is launched with the word Vayakhel. They're all gathering. Why would you gather the entire people? Kohanim, Yisraelim, Leviim. Chazal speak about that a small place was able to contain such a large mass. Why does it begin with this gathering? And
So perhaps I had a few thoughts about this, that you could be speaking about Vayakhel in contrast to Ki Tisa. And Vayakhel is getting the people together to build the Mishkan, but it's also perhaps in contrast to the Hitkahalut that was with Aaron before Chet HaEgel, and maybe even, Rabbi Sachs speaks about this, a tikkun, a different type of coming together to do something good. I myself would take it a stage further. If we look at what happened in Ki Tisa in the aftermath of the Egel, when Moshe comes down and Mil Hashem Elai and people come to Moshe, this must have been an earthquake for the community. People killed each other within the community, and I think that when something as significant as this happens to the community, there's a need to bring the community together to be metakein. I remember that just after Gush Katif, it was a year or two after Gush Katif, there was a soldier on Yom Ha'atzmaut who was going to be given an Ot Hitztainut, a badge of excellence, and he refused to shake the hand of the Ramat Kal. And I remember in the news that there was shock and horror because he was an evacuee from Gush Katif, and there was shock and horror in the community because I think the vast majority of people thought this was over. But it wasn't over because there was no hikalut afterwards. There was no kind of tikkun to what happened. There was a big sibul that was very hurt, and there was no healing. And I think that perhaps we could see Vayakhel as a healing process to Chet HaEgel. And also a place that this Rabbi Sachs does talk about is the two types of hikalut, a hikalut bizman, which is Shabbat, and hikalut in makom, which is Beit Knesset. And of course, Beit Knesset is Mishkan Ma'at. It's a place which unites the people. Even if everyone isn't able to access the place on a regular basis, it is somewhere that brings people together. As Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky says in the beginning of Bamidbar, that there's only a dividing of the tribes once the Mishkan is in the middle. Once there's a common denominator, then we can each go in our varied ways. And there is something in the middle there that unites us together.
But we're facing a crisis. This isn't 2002, it's 2022, and so many shuls and Batei Knesset and Mikdash Miyat have dispersed because of Corona, have led to backyard minyanim, garden minyanim, street minyanim, and we're now reimagining what role the Beis Knesset will play, how to get people back into the Beis Knesset. It's more convenient. What would you say if a Rav came to you? You've had a lot of experience in communities and community building. Rav came to you, people aren't coming to shul. How would you on Parshas Vayakhel?
Well, the truth is, I'm a gabbai in our shul, so I asked Rav Rimon how we're going to get people back. His answer to me was, God took them away, He'll bring them back. That was his answer. I don't know. It gives you a bit of din v'cheshbon. You know, there could be people who don't want to come back, not because of Corona, for other reasons, and you have to try and work out how to make the Bet Knesset, without compromise, more accessible to people that they want to come back. It's also very noach for people to daven in their streets. It's comfortable, it's quick as far as they're concerned, amcha. And la'adla, we're seeing, well, the weather helps us, right? The bad weather helps us, or the good weather. When it rains, it's cold in the gush and people are coming
Gishmei
back.
bracha.
Yeah. So, I'm not sure, because there's a bit of a Yetzer Hara as well for people. If they're davening at home, it's easier for them. But Baruch Hashem, people are coming back. Thank God.
I would imagine it speaks to what you said before, that this reconstitution of shuls has to be attacked or has to be constructed from two different flanks. on the one hand, the sanctity of tefillah, and that davening in a Beis Mikdash Ma'at, Lifnei Hashem, Shara Elokim, Shara Shemayim, not just with a minyan, but in a Beis Knesses. The role of Beis Knesses for tefillah, the role of standing Lifnei Hashem, it can't be recreated, can't be simulated just in a arbitrary location where 10 Jews or 20 Jews or 30 Jews gather. And from another perspective, how valuable and important community is to us, and how pivotal a Beis Knesses is in establishing a sense of. I know that you grew up in England, which obviously had smaller communities than in the United States, but still had larger communities. But I'm always shocked when I speak to people. Well, where'd you grow up in England?
Just outside London, Edgware.
Oh, so that's a pretty large community.
It is now, yeah. It wasn't when I grew up, but I think that's one of the very few disadvantages when you grow up in Chutz La'aretz. You are united by the Beit Knesset. You know, people come to shul. You live in a yeshuv, you know as well as I do, you can go to any minyan, you can be here for 3 weeks and not see someone, and still everyone's going to minyanim, and you don't see, the shul doesn't necessarily bring people together when there's other things that bring people together.
Right, right. And also I think because shuls in Eretz Yisrael are primarily built, or not exclusively, but primarily built, in Chutz La'aretz, you're more invested in the shul, because you have to raise the funds, and it's your project, and it's your baby, and you feel ownership. Here in general, so many of the religious services are provided by the government. Right. So there's less of a self-empowerment to provide a chevra kadisha, to provide every school, shuls, community. Right. But I'm always shocked not shocked, I'm just inspired when I speak to people. I grew up in New York, I grew up in Brooklyn. When I speak to people that grew up in smaller communities, and the level of intimacy and of shared experience and of common interaction, it's something I miss in my own background. I'm jealous when I see in other people, and as you said, it's harder to contribute here. Right. You teach a lot of young ladies, young women, I'm sure very, very talented, aspirational, ambitious. How do you, on the one hand, advance their ambition and creativity while also creating reverence and submission? And to me, that's the riddle of Parshas Vayakhel. You've got artisans and craftsmen and engineers, and there's this explosion of creativity. B'tzalel ben Uri ben Chor, Kol Chacham Leiv, Hashem Elisiv Ruach Chachma. I just can imagine the dyes and the metals, just the procession, watching the color and watching the pageantry as the materials move their way from the collection point to the manufacturing locations to the staging areas. And people are working and thinking and conversations and blueprints, aside from the menorah, which is fashioned miraculously. And yet, Kasher Tziva Hashem, Kasher Tziva Hashem, Kasher Tziva Hashem. It's the challenge we all face. It's very easy to choke people with submission. You want to empower them while still creating. How do you tackle that?
It's interesting. I suppose that could be an explanation for what Shabbos is doing right next to the Mishkan, right? That Melechet Machshevet Asra Torah, that the creativity, a day where Rav Hirsch's words, you would simply refrain from doing creative work, which takes away from your ability to, or is meant to remind you. I think it's a big challenge. I can go back to the years I was here. It's a long time. You know, when I started here, I still remember you throwing a ball on the front lawn there.
No, someone else or someone. I never touched the ball.
I also remember you walking into Night Seder with 20 books and spreading yourself.
That's the real story.
It's almost 38 years ago, I think, 39 years ago. And when the yeshiva, the initial thing that this yeshiva gave to me, and has always given to me, I still have the pictures of Rav Amital and Rav Lichtenstein on my wall in my office, was exactly that, was this kind of Yirat Shamayim. For me to approach Rav Lichtenstein was like going to the Sneh HaBoer. It was like mamash kacha, and if he asked me a question, it was, you know, it was exactly that. And with Rav Amital as well. And I remember I had a conversation when I was coming back here for Kolel. When I made Aliyah, I went to live on kibbutz, and I started doing smicha in yeshivat kibbutz Sadati with also an alumni from here, Rabbi Lau, and we were learning nida together. And then when I got married to my wife, she didn't want to go to kibbutz, and we decided to come back here to Kolel. And so Rabbi Lau asked me at the time, what is it that keeps bringing you back to the Gush? And I said, when I walk into the Beis Medrash in the Gush, I feel Yirat Shamayim. I feel that I don't think, you know, everything's the way people perceive you. I don't think I can ever give what my Rebbein gave to me, to my girls, in that level. But there's an element of kavod Torah, which has to come with the learning. A Rebbe of mine in England, Rabbi Isaac Bernstein, he was a brilliant darshan, and he said that when Moshe approaches the snare, God says, take off your shoes. When you're approaching Torah, slowly, you go slowly, you don't like stampede inwards as if you're a balabais, you go with a bit of anava. It's a big question, it's very hard. I often differentiate with students when students has a Rashi and they're struggling with a Rashi. There are two comments you can make. You can say, I don't understand Rashi, or you can say Rashi doesn't make sense. Right. And there's an enormous gap between those two comments.
Right. But to even get to that stage, you have to be assertive and asking questions on Rashi. And it's that middle stage to teach people to ask questions,
right, and
to face those questions with intellectual honesty. Because if you don't have the baseline of intellectual honesty, then there's no yardstick by which to judge whether you understand something or not, if you just accept. But then once you apply intellectual honesty and you reach that point where your own baseline of understanding just isn't symmetrical with the Rashi standing in front of you or the text in front of you, at that point, is there submission to something larger than yourself? As you said, I don't understand that, or?
There needs to be. I think there needs to be. It's like Ein Kelokenu, Mi Kelokenu. I often say to my students, it could start off, who is like our God? Ein Kelokenu, there's no one like our God. But Ein Kelokenu, there's no one like it. Now ask what you want, with a knowledge of, or with an awareness that if you don't get the answer that satisfies you, you're able to step back. I also point out to my students that there are enough Tosfos in where he finishes, they finish off saying Sarich and they move on to the next one. That's Sarich I don't know. There's not always an answer, and it's no. One doesn't need to be ashamed to say, I don't know, I haven't got an answer. I'm not prepared as a teacher to try and waffle away an answer for the sake of a student. You know, there's times that you just don't have answers. Many things that we don't have answers to, and as Beseda, we're only Bnei Adam. So we're in search of answers, and with the ability to step back and say, okay, if I don't understand, I don't understand.
So, being that we're at the end of our conversation, it's time for something not lighter, but something a little bit different. What's your favorite part of the Mishkan? Your favorite kli? What has always intrigued you? Your favorite color? When you read Parshas Vayakhel, let's face it, I'm being honest, intellectual honesty, it's not an easy parsha. It's the second round.
Right.
those mathematicians, they love it. The rest of us, right, it's hard making our way through Rashi. When you get to that second round, less Rashis, but obviously, you know, what part of the Mishkan intrigues you?
Actually, I've never thought about it in that way. I suppose the Kodesh more than the outside. I always look at the inner part of the Mishkan as obviously a progressive religious status. On the outside, there's kind of control, animal control, and going. I think the menorah, I suppose, with the menorah, the lights of the menorah, Hanukkah has always been, for some reason, a favorite celebration for me. I think looking at light and the awe and what the menorah represents would probably be for me.
We have the privilege to live in a renewed state, whose emblem is the menorah, and it's been such a powerful image. Especially, I always think about how the image of the menorah on the Arch of Titus was such a oppressive sign of Jewish suffering, and when it was then fixed into the Pantheon in Rome, and so many Jews passed it and felt the pain and felt the anguish and now that has become a resurgent sign of Jewish autonomy. Because you're teaching young women, and obviously since you're a male teacher, let's get a very sensitive question. In Parshas Vayakhel, towards the end of Vayakhel, there's a description of the kior, made of copper. And Rashi tells the story that Moshe didn't want to use the copper because the copper was provided by women from their mirrors, because he's used copper as a mirror. And Moshe thought this was vain, this was sexuality, this was the sign of the devil, and our terminology. It can't be incorporated into the Mishkan, certainly not for the kior. And Hashem says to Moshe, no, chavav alai mi'akol. These copper mirrors are more beloved to me than anything, because these are the mirrors that women used in Mitzrayim to keep their physical appearance attractive. And it's a strange world, it's a challenging world. How is that part of your education? Is it part of the education? You put it on the side, did you incorporate it? Sexuality, their future as women, their future as wives?
Well, anything to do with that, my women teachers approach directly. I think one of the reasons when I think it was I suppose siyata dishmaya, whatever, when I was offered the job, I've been in this school now, Midrash Rova, for 28 years,
wow.
since I left Kollel. And
it's all your wife's decision. The fate that decides our future.
So I teach boys a bit, but I feel that they really are the backbone. I feel as on an individual level that so much credit goes to my wife for what I do. Only 1 year, and I've pointed this out to girls, only 1 year at the end of a year have girls ever noted that publicly by sending a bunch of flowers to my wife, even though my wife pays the price, my family pays the price.
Can you give the girls my wife's address? I mean, I'll buy my own flowers, but...
So I think, they are such a backbone of the house, the family is such an important part of Judaism. I think that's why Neirot Shabbat, Doche, Neirot Chanukah. That's what I believe, that by educating Bnot Yisrael, we're educating them towards family and the strength, and it's good that a wife has the knowledge and the ability to push as well. My wife's learning more than me sometimes. She's always with her chavrusas, and that's what we're trying to do. And those areas, the sensitive areas, protocol has it anyway that I don't deal with those things. I have a very capable staff of women who deal with that.
But it is incorporated.
Yes, for sure. Has to be.
Another contemporary issue. We're living through a pandemic, and we're living through an era in which families are less functional. Unfortunately, soaring divorce rates. It's creating a lot of psychological pressure, a lot of need for psychological counseling, and at least some of the statistics have proven that this entire perfect storm of corona and dysfunctional families are taking a toll, at least disproportionately, on teenage girls. And there's a lot of pressure that they're under. How has that affected your stance, your program, your interaction with them? Is this something you detect on the ground level?
My detection on ground level has been, specifically this year, has been dealing with a group of students who weren't in school for a year and a half. And the way Zoom works or doesn't work, if a school doesn't demand for the students to show their face on Zoom, a student can have their Zoom on and be lying down or be reading a book or be doing something else. And that has been a challenge that it was a curveball perhaps I didn't see coming even. But thank God they have come back to it. Concentration, the ability to focus, but I'm not sure that's just corona. I think that's the result of the age we're living in as it is. There is a lot more anxiety, a lot more psychological issues. I often, and all types of issues. You probably, in your job, are very focused on the specific learning in the Beit Midrash. My job includes the technical things and logistical things of running a school.
I wish.
Oh no, you are as well. I don't know.
You're describing my dream job.
Okay, so then you will understand when I started in the midrashah. The only thing that we would have to analyze on an application was vegetarian, and now people are allergic to everything, and there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of ADD, OCD, things that weren't on our radar at all there. In this area, I learned in yeshiva. The psychology I've learned has been through my work, but I have to work with professionals. I always work with professionals when it comes to medical health and mental health as well. I think part of taking responsibility is knowing your limitations as well. And this kind of beseder, and we'll work it out. We don't work that way. We try and work with professionals all the time.
Well, our time has ended, but that's a great way to end. Knowing your limitations. It's the flip side of confidence. Absolutely. And together it creates poise, and Baruch Hashem, that's how we lead people, confident in what we can do well for them, but also cognizant and transparent about our limitations and the ability to say, I don't know. So thank you for coming. Come back again in Hashem.
Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.